to begin.
You're listening to Magrito Podcast Network, celebrating the culture of Chicanos and Latinos one story and voice at a time. Listen to more Magrito Podcast Network shows over at magrito.net.
You're listening to KQBHLP, Los Angeles, California, 101.5 FM, a community service of the Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory. You're listening to The Social Primate with your host, Eddie Aguirre. Today, my guest is none other than Fernanda Sanchez. Fernanda, thank you so much for making the time to come in.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
First and foremost, I was just telling you that I got a small glimpse of your speech at the Chicano Moratorium 54th anniversary. Powerful, something that I got to rewatch on YouTube a couple of days ago. And again, one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to have you on the show, just to kind of delve into the history of how you got into this, what continues to motivate you, and the issues that you're seeing now in Lincoln Heights.
That's a great question. And as someone who studied philosophy, I think my answer is existentialism.
Yeah.
Just having a crisis every day. But in all seriousness, I think that gentrification has been in my mind since middle school, if I'm being honest with you. I had a substitute teacher who taught us what the word gentrification was. Mm-hmm. And since that day, I knew that that was something that was really important to our people. And I didn't really start seeing it until, I would say, 2014. Mm-hmm. So I went out to school in Minnesota for a couple of years. I was out in the boonies. And coming back to LA and seeing everything changed so quickly in Highland Park, I started writing about it and doing research through school. And it wasn't until the pandemic that really took me out of the couch activist to actually being out there on the street. And the reason for that was during the pandemic, we know there was an eviction moratorium, which means people weren't allowed to be evicted. But I was seeing people be evicted every single day in Lincoln Heights. And this wasn't legal, of course. And so I saw a social media post about it, and there was a call to action on let's knock on some doors. Mm-hmm. And I went out, I knocked on some doors, and I kind of was a part of the process of finding a group of people to create the Lincoln Heights Tenants Union branch. And that kind of propelled me into realizing there's a lot happening here in Lincoln Heights, and it's being swept under the rug. And since then, I've been realizing that all of this needs to be brought up to light. Yeah. This needs to be documented.
Now, what was the biggest thing that you saw as a challenge now that you're part of the neighborhood council? You're the president, and from my understanding, the first Chicana on the council, right?
Yeah. It happens really fast, and it's been a really challenging place to navigate. Being a woman in power, femme in power, being brown, and also being really short. Whether you think about that or not, really plays into the dynamic of how people interact. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely been a challenge, but it's been a really awesome learning experience. And I think one of the things that I've taken from all of this is these platforms really do matter. Mm-hmm. 4 years ago, I had no idea what the neighborhood council was. I think most people don't. But now that I'm in this platform and I'm making these decisions and I'm presenting these actions and I'm documenting a lot of this stuff, people are mad. Mm-hmm. People in power are mad. The city is mad. People are trying to take over the board. And in a way, it's been really validating to see, you know what? This is an important platform. People want to take over this, and all the more reason to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, one of the crazy things that I was briefly mentioning to you before then, that I had this experience a couple of days ago. I'm from the Southeast LA area, specifically in Cudahy. And I was just hanging out with my parents and my suegra, and they're just talking politics, which is kind of rare for me to catch them talking about. And they were just going down the list of things that they felt like the city needed. They were talking about the things that the city thinks it needs the wants versus needs. And my dad, him being a resident of that city for the last 28 years or so, he was just kind of expressing how angry he gets when people come knocking on his door asking for votes. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, I've been here for so long, I haven't seen no changes. His whole concept of the trust, right? The trust in these political process, it's been worn down. So he has no faith in this. And to me, that was just kind of a small speck of the bigger picture. But to me, I was like, okay, well, this is just a speck. This is one person's perspective. Like, now multiply this throughout the whole city. The people want to have their voices heard. At the same time, they want to take charge of what is going on and be able to make those changes for themselves. And I don't know, that just got me thinking a lot. There's a disconnection there, and I'm trying to figure out how we can reconnect that with the people into that process, you know?
I think your father's sentiments about the government is really valid. How can you trust politicians? How can you trust the system and the government with everything going on locally and globally? In many ways, I think once I started learning how neighborhood councils function, made me trust politicians a lot less, actually.
Yeah.
It's one of those, like, once you know how the game runs, you realize, wow, they're playing an awful game.
Yeah.
They really don't care about us. And in that way, the neighborhood council, on the same side of the coin, on the other side, has also been very empowering. Because now I know how the city council runs. And I know that when they tell us, oh, we can't do that, our hands are tied, I know that's a lie. Because my neighborhood council is doing it.
Yeah.
And we don't get paid. You know, if we can do it, the city council can absolutely do it. And one of the ways that I've been using the neighborhood council as a platform, which has been very empowering to the community, is allowing community members to voice their concerns and write letters in support of whatever it is they're going on. A really quick example of that, we have the Toland Way tenants in Eagle Rock, which is in CD1. Their apartment building is about to be demolished, and all of those people are going to lose their homes. So we gave them a chance to give a presentation, to talk about what that's like, and then we wrote a letter documenting all of that and submitted it to the city. And neighborhood councils aren't doing that. And when we started doing stuff like this, people started noticing it. And they all just started flocking to the Lincoln Heights Neighborhood Council because they knew they had a voice here. Can we do a presentation for this? Can you help us and write a letter for that? And in many ways, I am proud to say that we are the most radical board out there. We've been able to, for a lack of better words, commandeer this platform and really change it in what I think it needs to be. I mean, I'm learning what it needs to be still, but like, for example, we are the first neighborhood council to pass a ceasefire resolution. And to me, that's crazy. There were 99 neighborhood councils. Like, what are you all doing? So because we're using our platform in that way, we are starting to get a lot of attention.
Yeah, and it's not always the best attention too, right? Yeah, because from my understanding, and I don't know if you can, how deep you can talk about it, but you had like this really interesting, weird encounter with an individual just a week or two ago.
I'd love to talk about that because one of the reasons why I joined the neighborhood council was to document. To me, gentrification is erasure. You see a community change from A to Z, and it's as if we were never there.
Yeah.
Our stories aren't told. Legally, it's not documented. The city advertises it as we just cleaned up this neighborhood. It looks better businesses, et cetera, et cetera. But for who? And so part of my experience here in writing letters against gentrifying development, which the entire board has to vote on, by the way. I'm not like a totalitarian here.
Like it must be done.
No, like it goes through a vote. And I've been going to City Hall and reading these statements that neighborhood councils usually don't do. And recently, we presented a community impact statement against the USC Translational Hub. USC Medical School is in like between Lincoln Heights and Boyle Heights, and they're expanding. And we saw what they did to the South Side, and they're doing the exact same thing in Lincoln Heights. So we wrote a community impact statement against it in support of like a coalition of community members advocating against this. or at the very least, they're demanding really reasonable community demands. And so I read the statement, and the city council voted against the appeal and approved this development. And USC's side was full of union laborers, and our side was literally just señoras, from the community. And the community liaison representative came up from behind me, and he's really tall and I'm really short, and so he had to go out of his way to speak into my ear that he was going to take over my neighborhood council. Yeah, how smart is that to threaten someone at City Hall? And that's the first time that's ever happened to me. I've spoken up against many developers, and this is the first time this happened, and it's USC. And USC has a pretty awful history in Lincoln Heights and in Boyle Heights. I don't know if you're familiar with the sterilization of women in the 70s.
I'm not, to be honest.
Yeah, USC conducted sterilization of women in the 70s without them knowing, and it was Black, Indigenous, brown women. Yeah, and in 2022, their version of reparations was, we're going to do a mural at our hospital acknowledging this dark past. And it's also my understanding that same year, the California, I think, State Board presented a reparations bill. But that bill disqualified all Boyle Heights women from getting money. Yeah. What? And so when you look at that and you look at the way USC continues to interact with people in our communities, and I'm going to say with women in the communities, because I know that had I been a 6'2" guy, the president of the neighborhood council, I would have been treated absolutely completely different.
Of course.
They would have wined me and dined me to see what can we do to collaborate, and I don't get that. And it's not that I want that, but it's highlighting how these interactions and these dynamics happen. So I called on to the community to help me email his boss, and they responded. And USC responded with, actually, we felt threatened. What? We felt unsafe. And I wanna just say, a multi-billionaire corporation like USC will never be oppressed. They can't.
Yeah, of course.
So I think it was a really good, they revealed their cards. And it goes to show that these corporations are not here to work with the community. However they paint it, they are not working with the community. Yeah. And they are here to take over. And how do we move forward from that? How do we get to stay in our neighborhoods that we created, that we built? And that to me is the biggest issue. Gentrification comes with a lot of symptoms, and some of them look good, and that's the only stuff that people see. But what they don't see are all the illegal evictions, all the tias and tios, the moms and dads that are now living in their vans because their rent just got raised. They're not seeing how the median income in a community changes, and they're not seeing how all of us just aren't there at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, it's a crazy thing that I've been seeing specifically, again, in Cudahy. For a long time, nobody wanted to move down there. Just like every other place in the late 90s, or just in the 90s in general, it was just full of gangs and just gang violence. And over the last decade or so, it definitely has cleaned up. And, I had also mentioned that to me, at some point, the idea of gentrification was like this shiny object that I was like, it's not that bad. It's not that bad, This is a community that barely sees any improvements in anything, right? We're facing environmental issues. And when they come in and they're like, oh, well, we're going to give you a Sprouts, or we're going to give you this, this shiny ass place. It's like, oh, yes, please let me have it. But then you don't realize the consequences until way after. Now you start seeing people's homes being sold off so they can build multi-complex apartments, 3 stories high, blocking sceneries that you used to see before. And you're like, this is coming at you fast, and by this point, next thing you know, your place is getting bought off. And what do? Some people fight, some people don't. And a lot of the times this process seems very scary. So it's easier to just give up and kind of walk away from it. Even if you've been there for decades, you built your life around this area. Now you're just being told to get up, leave with no guidance or anything.
It's a very scary thing. It's absolute erasure. And I'm happy you bring that up because I've been saying from the beginning, gentrification is multifaceted. It's not just one component, and it continues to evolve, and it looks different in every community. In the East Coast, like back in the early 90s, when gentrification was being written about, it took 10 years for a community to completely change. It happened in 4 years in Highland Park.
Yeah.
That's a super accelerated version of gentrification. And we have to ask ourselves why. Why is it happening much faster here in our communities? And there's a lot of it. There's absolutely political corruption that goes with that. And also our communities are monolingual immigrant communities. I see a lot of fear, especially during the pandemic. So many people lost their homes.
Yeah.
And at one point, Lincoln Heights was also the highest rate of COVID deaths. And people don't talk about that. And none of that is a coincidence. Right now, CD 14, which is a district Lincoln Heights is in, also has the highest eviction rate. That's also not a coincidence. And it's a really big, how do I say this, psychological detriment to live through that and to see that. I mean, I grew up in Lincoln Heights. And even the CDC recognizes gentrification as like a health and safety issue because it does affect people psychologically. Seeing your community change, your neighbors move, it's a big deal.
Yeah, I don't know. Like you mentioned earlier, it erases the identity of the neighborhood first and foremost. And then as an individual, again, you're just left there to fend for yourself. And again, make it easier for us to be displaced. Now, one of the things that I had seen that I admired, to be honest, whenever there's like a meeting or something, it looks like people are engaged. It looks like people show up. And it's something that I don't normally see in city council meetings, where I'm from. It's people, there's like a super low turnout. And of course, they're going to get away with whatever they want, because there's nobody there to really hold them accountable. So like from you being in this position now, like what do these systems look like to you when you're holding somebody accountable? Like what can people do?
Wow, that's $1 million question. It's hard to say. What I do know is that people are fed up. I'm fed up. Yeah. I'm tired of this. And I always kind of see it, and this is like an oversimplification. It always seems to come down between abolition of the system versus reform of the system. And I think with everything just kind of bubbling up with what's happening in our communities, like economically and socially and all of that, I think it might lean towards more abolition.
Yeah.
I'm hoping.
Yeah, right. Like you're starting from scratch.
Yeah, and which is an impossible feat if people aren't involved. And in many ways, I understand, at least people in our communities, why they aren't involved. We're so busy just trying to survive. And I've noticed that people that are very politically involved tend to be privileged people because they have the luxury of time.
Exactly.
They have the luxury of participation. But at the same time, these policies affect us the most. We are the most vulnerable. And at some point, we need to stop being the sleepy giant.
Right.
And we need to overturn this system because, I mean, if you think about it, brown people are like 80% of the economy in California. That's huge. It's huge. And it's devastating for me to continue to see our people be oppressed, to see our vulnerabilities be exploited and to be erased. And so regardless of how hard it is to confront these issues, we need to try. We need to get involved. And I always say that the easiest way to do that is to talk to your neighbors.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, that's the easiest way to connect.
Do you talk to your neighbors? Like, I didn't talk to my neighbors for a long time. I didn't know who they were. But when you start talking to your neighbors and you start talking about like, hey, did you know our building just got sold?
Mm-hmm.
These are our rights. Like, things start to change. And I have seen like comadres be super radicalized.
Mm-hmm.
And like they're at City Hall yelling at all of these city council members. And that to me brings me so much joy.
Yeah.
And it makes me realize, you know what? Everyone can do this. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, everybody has the power to advocate and stand up for themselves. It's just like, I like how you mentioned, like, it's a matter of talking to your neighbors, because once you start talking to them, you start seeing again that we have these common issues. You feel less lonely. You feel more empowered to stand up, and sometimes by yourself, you're like, oh, I'm gonna get in trouble, or I'm gonna have, it's gonna come back to me. Mm-hmm. But, you start realizing like, no, you stand together. I mean, sure. I mean, we all fall together maybe, but if we all do stand together, nobody can stop us, and that's the power of unifying communities. And to me, I'm not an organizer or some sort of guy who's trying to rile people up together and stuff, but I want to know how we can convince people or at least get people interested enough to be able to do this for themselves. I know you can't bribe them like, hey, we'll do a raffle, or like we'll have cash prizes. Like, of course people are going to show up then, but that removes the purpose of why they're really there. Like, they're focused on some other aspect of it that's going to benefit themselves rather than benefiting their community and as a whole. So I know we can't figure out an exact answer in just this conversation, but I would like to be able to play around with the ideas of what that looks like for our community, because we all have some sort of thing inside of us that we feel strongly about, but we're just not given the platform to be able to voice it,
Absolutely right. I think you already are organizing. You're giving people the platform to talk about these things. I mean, when do I get to talk about gentrification on the radio? Never.
Yeah, right.
Who would ever give me that chance to talk about how USC is predatory in Lincoln Heights? Mm-hmm. Nobody. And I think that changing people or motivating people always starts with a conversation. Yeah. So, I think you're already doing it.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, sometimes it's a little, we're just here in the room. So to me, it's just like, it's just me and you here. But you're totally right. Like this is being brought to an audience that, again, if they're tuning in, it's because they're either interested in your story and just how we can navigate these systems, and at the same time educate themselves. Because again, we can't be gatekeepers for this education any longer,
100%. And I think that's a part of the issue with activism. I see myself as like someone just learning. Mm-hmm. And I do see a lot of gatekeepiness in many like circles. And I want to encourage folks that the only way to move forward is to like educate the younger generation, the people that are in high school right now, because they might not have a future in Lincoln Heights. That's terrifying.
Yeah, right. It's
just handing over the torch, which I know is a hard thing for a lot of people, but it needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable. At that age, not a lot of people are inclined to be involved politically, of course. But without that education, we're going to be complacent, We're, like you said, couch advocates. Or what was it, couch
activism? Do not repeat that. It was a terrible term.
No, but I like it because sometimes we're on our phone and we're just sharing, liking stuff, and it gives us a false sense of that we're advocating for something. I mean, yeah, we're sharing. That's a big thing. But at the same time, it makes you feel like, oh, well, I did it. I did something. It's like, okay, well, and I know it looks different for people like everywhere, but at the same time, it's like you gotta give thought into the way you navigate in the world, and Absolutely. Sometimes you gotta do a little bit more.
Yeah. I was having a conversation about social media and how, I mean, it's a great tool for advocacy and activism. But at the same time, I've noticed that in this age of social media, we're consumed with information overload. There's a protest tomorrow, then another one the day after, and this person's getting evicted. This person needs mutual aid. That we don't really focus our attention and ambition to like one thing. And I can get like 1,000 likes on a post, but how many of them will actually show up to the protest? Exactly. And that I also think is like a huge distraction to how to funnel our energy into something. And that's why I always say it's important to have these conversations, because sharing something on social media is just going to die there. And although it's a great tool, I don't want people to think that spreading awareness on social media is like a huge gold star. In my opinion, it's not.
Yeah, right. Correct. Yeah, no, I exactly feel the same way about it. Like you just mentioned, you did say that conversations like this kind of happen. And like you said, sit down with your neighbor, talk to them, sit down with somebody that you know, have a discussion about it. I know sometimes things get heated and stuff, but the idea is, give people the ability to critically think, and let them decide for themselves. And I think once we start doing that, we break boundaries. Very much like this podcast. I've had so many people on this show that I learned something new every time, and I'm chipping away at parts that I used to think I was biased in, and now I'm a little bit more open-minded. And that only comes with exposing yourself into this information. Otherwise, you stay the same person in a sense, right? Yeah. And there's no growth. And I think that's the thing that's missing, and everybody's just kind of stuck on, of course, we're working, we're hustling, and we don't have time to just miss work to go to a protest, That's how that system keeps you in line, like you miss work for this protest because you're going to advocate, you're going to losing your money for your bills, Capitalism right? At its finest. So it's just these things that they're in place in a way to kind of stop you from going there, because we don't have the luxury of time, like you mentioned earlier, with some people that have the privilege to do so. That's the most valuable thing that you can have, time.
One thing that I've learned from other groups organizing in Chinatown, those folks got it down. Yeah. I admire them so much, is the way they frame participation of there is a role for everybody. If you like to draw, make us posters. If you're good at social media, create content for us. If you have free time and like to talk to people, come and knock doors with us. If you're good at video editing, edit our videos. And that really changed my perspective in realizing there really is a role for everybody. When it comes to, fighting the system or fighting gentrification, you do need all kinds of people. You need people in the legal field challenging these awful racist policies. You need people documenting what's happening in our communities. And I have a background in social work. I think that we also need people to heal trauma. Like this is a big trauma to our people, especially like our lineage. We come from a land that's been colonized, and in many ways, I argue that it's still in our DNA through epigenetics. And that's something that needs to be acknowledged and worked through in order to continue the legacy of fighting the system.
Yeah, that pressure is intense when you really think about it. Of course, it's going to feel overwhelming, right? If you don't talk to people about it, you feel alone, and that in itself is going to mess with you. And then hence, it doesn't allow you to be the best you can for your community. I think at one point or another, we move from the mindset of just the self into the whole. And I think when we get to that point, I think that's when we can really start seeing that we can use these emotions, these feelings, and turn them into something positive, right? Like use them as a catalyst to be able to bring change rather than just succumb to it. And it's a hard process. It's going to take time, but again, we have people such as yourself, people around you as well. And, from my visit to the Chicano Moratorium anniversary, there's a gang of people just waiting to get activated. But it still speaks volumes because, again, we want it. We know what we want. We're just trying to figure out these systems that have been placed in front of us that we don't know nothing about, and we're trying to navigate around it.
When I spoke at the Chicano Moratorium, I gave a call to action for a protest in Lincoln Heights. And people from the Chicano Moratorium that I didn't know showed up to that protest. And that made me feel really good. I thought, this is what community is about. Right. And I often think about, like, our ancestors survived much worse. And, like, how did they do that? And it was definitely through community. That's what keeps you afloat.
Mm-hmm. Like for you, what has been the challenge for you personally, being in this position to try to be able to just manage people's expectations of what this position looks like?
It's interesting because when I get people, I've had people describe me as like a saint, community saver, and I hate that. Hate that. I don't want to create a dynamic where people are relying on me. That is not how we move forward. So I
love that. I love how you put that. Yeah.
I mean, as much as I kind of really suck at delegating because I have way too much on my plate, I try to pass the torch and educate others, because it's not sustainable if you have one leader, and it's also not safe. It's not smart. So, and I think people don't like that. They love someone else taking care of things for you. And I've gotten people to tell me, like, after I got my seat in the neighborhood council, like, oh, I don't need to go to any hearings. You got it. Like, you're in there now. That's what we needed. And it's like, no, like, you still need to be engaged. Like, I can't be up there alone. Like, I'm getting literal threats at City Hall. I can't be there alone. Like, and I'm not alone. I'm not trying to like paint the picture that I'm alone, but I just creating an environment where the community is not relying on somebody. That's not the right way.
Yeah, no, right. Because once knock on wood that you're out of the picture, you move on to something else. What then? Like that whole saying, like, teach a man to fish and he can like eat for a lifetime or something. It's similar things. Like if you're able to teach people how to be active, how to go about showing up, it's like you're going to teach them and the future to figure out how to continue making these progress for these movements. Otherwise, if it's just you, like, it ends there with you, and that's horrible.
That's scary. And I've had thoughts like, I attended a death talk series on like what to do to prepare for death, just like in a philosophical way. Not that I'm planning to die anytime soon, but it had me thinking, like, all of these procedures and everything I've learned, it's kind of just all in my head. I haven't created like a manual or a process to hand down that information, and I realized I need to do that. I needed, like, well, for example, my seat is up in January. If I lose, or I don't know, if I'm not here anymore, like, who's gonna take over, and how are they gonna know what to do? So it's a big responsibility that I was not expecting to have, but I have it now, so I better figure it out.
Now, what do you think will be the easiest way to be able to get these resources to community members in general? Like, let's say somebody's listening to this right now and they're like, I need to know where to start. Like, what advice can you give them?
The way that I started was I literally made a pamphlet on tenant rights and what the law was at that time. I had a friend print like 200 of them, and I just dropped them everywhere. And that worked. So just, if you have an idea, put it down on paper and find another creative, find somebody else to help you make it happen. And if you don't have that resource to find somebody else or have a different outlet, hit me up. Like, I'm down to like activate people. I think I like that more than what I'm doing on the neighborhood council.
Yeah, I mean, it's a stressful job. And I mean, a lot of people, even myself, like, we don't know how these councils work. Like, again, when I take a look at Cudahy and I see that they're passing these things, that I'm just like, why did you guys spend money on that weird sidewalk? I'm completely oblivious to what's going on. So that's why I'm like just talking smack. But I don't know what happens behind those things. I'm curious about this kind of stuff. And I'm having a hard time figuring out how this moves around. Like, imagine somebody who's not even interested in this. They're just like...
I would encourage people to go to those meetings in person. At the very least, you'll get entertainment out of it. Because these people are just hilarious to watch. at the most, you'll be so angry at how these boards run and the decisions they're making.
Yeah.
When I first started attending neighborhood council meetings, it's because they were trying to build like a 8-story building on Avenue 34, which is a very toxic site.
Yeah.
And they're building luxury units on there. And I was going to these meetings and all these old heads were talking about how we need these luxury units. It's better for Lincoln Heights. And it made me so angry that this board was full of old white men. And they were making these decisions on the community that didn't reflect our needs at all.
Yeah.
It pissed me off. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to run for this board. And it was me and a group of people who ran for a slate. And every single one of us won our seat. And we completely flipped the neighborhood council. And we took it over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think I could do that. And I didn't even know I would ever want to do that. But it's been a wild ride.
Now, I know you're currently, or there's going to be a trial, I think, at some point in November, right?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for reminding me. So the protest I mentioned earlier that folks showed up to, the community appealed an 8-story luxury development in front of Lincoln Park for the DMV. There was a rehab center that had been there for over 30 years. And their rent got raised by over $2,000 when the developer bought it. So they had to leave, and they left. And now the developer is advertising this site as an empty parking lot, which is not at all true. So the community submitted an appeal because it's going to affect Lincoln Park, which, if you don't know, Lincoln Park with the lake, it's actually the oldest ecosystem in all of Los Angeles. Like, birds from all over the world migrate to Lincoln Park, which is pretty cool. And we were able to borrow equipment from the Natural History Museum and do a bat survey. And we found endangered bat species, which, is enough to stop a development because there's a federal Endangered Species Act. If there's anything within a 5-mile radius, you cannot develop. And the city doesn't seem to care about that.
What?
LA City Council, I don't know what they're up to. But on November 5th, they are making a decision whether or not they're going to approve the community's appeal at City Hall. It bypassed the committees. It's now at the planning and land use of City Council. What we have been able to accomplish is the developer didn't want to do a soil test. They didn't want to do any environmental testing. And through the appeal, the city required them to do a soil test. Yeah. The results, we don't know them yet. And the development has been stalled for over 2 years now, which is pretty big news. So November 5th at 2 p.m., if you want to show up to City Hall and witness how the city makes its decisions and also come and support Lincoln Heights, please do.
That's so crazy. A couple years ago, they were trying to build a middle school. Part of Cudahy is like a industrial. There's like train yard and stuff. And they were trying to build like a middle school or a high school in one of those sites where it was like a steel company, but soil contaminated off the roof. And they were trying to pass it. Luckily, there was a group that got together and they were advocating against it. And they were able to put that project on hold. But it goes back to the thing is like, they're trying to just come develop just for the sake of developing, right? Because they always want to make their money, completely disregarding the fact that this soil is bad, where you're going to have kids. They had Delta Airline drop oil there a couple of years ago as well.
They treat us like a dumping ground.
Yeah, exactly. Like
we live here.
That would not be allowed in more affluent communities.
Never.
At all. And if it were to happen, people in those communities will go out like crazy to protest against this or to advocate against it. But here, although there was people who got together to, like, there was like a conference that they put together so people can show up. They just said, oh yeah, what happened? We're going to figure out what happened. And that's it. From my understanding, I don't think there's been any clear resolution. That's it. People just got dumped jet fuel and that's it. Like, come on. But we don't know where to go from here. Like, what do we do in the system that doesn't want to help us? And that's how, again, going back to the whole lonely feeling, like, what do you do when this happens?
Yeah. I felt very hopeless for a long time. And one of the things that really pulled me out of that was our elders. We have, OG environmentalists that have been through this fight before, and they taught me how to submit an appeal, and that's how we appealed this development. And through that knowledge, I've actually been able to help other people submit appeals against development, and even won. And that's what I mean by like sharing the knowledge and resources, because historically our communities never appeal these projects. We don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be an easier way to be able to get this information out, and I'm sure we're gonna figure it out. And when we figure it out, there's no stopping us, you know. So now, just to kind of touch base back on this trial that's gonna be happening in November. In the worst case scenario that this goes through, is there still something that the community can do to kind of halt something like this?
Oh, absolutely. If it goes through, the next step is it goes through a full city council vote. And it's important for the community to voice their opinion against this. The city council ends up approving it anyway, then we can move to a lawsuit, which requires a lot of money, which our community, you know, I mean, I don't know anyone that can pay $50,000 for an attorney, which requires fundraising. And that involves the entire community. So this is a long fight. It's a long fight. And it's hard to be patient, but we need to be to stay sane. And
now, what are your, like, do you have any specific, like, I don't know, like goals in mind that you want to do from here till then, and to kind of help activate people? Like, is there a specific, you know, process that you feel that's a good approach?
People have been wanting to do more actions. And I do think that there needs to be more visibility on what's happening. And so I need to work towards that. If I have any cool social media artists out there listening, I definitely need help with that. But just basically creating a full-blown campaign and what's happening in Lincoln Heights.
Oh, man. It's a process. I mean, I'm a little angry right now. Just talking about this stuff, it's gonna get you riled up. You know, it's gonna get you to the point where some people can think that it's a little radical for the things that you may be saying. You know, but it's not radical if all you're asking for is just accountability and like fair approach to this. You know, like, you know, we have every right to continue existing in these communities. You know, communities that we've built and communities that we've helped, you know, develop, you know, in one way or another by just being here. And for us to just be displaced like that, it's horrible. It's a terrible thing. You're erasing not just people's lives, but the cultura, you know, and the future of what these things are going to look like for the future, you know. And I know the future, some of the kids now, they don't really care about a lot of things already. I can just imagine, you know, if we're not proactive in trying to educate them in this stuff, they're gonna easily allow it to, you know. To them, it's gonna feel like it's a normal thing to allow developers to come in and build these, you know, luxury apartments or whatever, and it's gonna seem nice to them. But that's what we got to do, that work right now to make sure to clean that up, using the information that we learned from the people before us as well.
No, for sure. I understand your frustration. Just be loud about it. Be loud about your frustrations with what's happening to our people. Be loud about the unfair changes happening in our community. Being loud is what the system doesn't like. And being loud also encourages others to be loud. Most people don't speak up because they don't want to be the first ones to do it. You know, it's scary. So just be loud. Be angry and be loud.
Yeah, no, and people will recognize it, and they'll know when they've overstepped those limits. You know, I've had I spoke about this on the last podcast, but there were some issues with the landlord where I live, where he was just sending like all these letters to kind of just just put restrictions on people for like enjoying their day, you know. And it didn't start till I started sending a letter out just to be able to prove like, hey, look, somebody here knows that what you're doing is not legal. It's not right. And, you know, so far they haven't bothered me or anybody there for now, because again, you took the information that I learned, put it in their face, and now they know that they're not going to easily get away with stuff, you know. And I know not everybody has people in their surroundings that have the capability to put a letter like this out, you know. And that's okay, you know, just find those people around you that feel strongly about, like you said, find creatives, find people that are are good at different things, that are willing to put their time and effort into making sure that they can help drive a movement.
Yeah. No, and that's the beauty about our people is they're always ready to throw down and back someone up. You know, and it's a beautiful thing.
Well, Fernanda, thank you so much for making the time to come out onto the show. For people to keep updated with what you're going through, the stuff that's going to be happening on the trial in November, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at ferny.ferns, ferny.ferns.
Thank you so much. Everybody else, again, this is a long fight. You know, it's a continuous fight, and just got to keep our head up, have these conversations, open our mind to critical thinking, and we got this.
Yeah, we sure do. Thank you for having me.
Love